Awesome. Welcome, everyone, to 2E Math Solutions. Just in case you're not familiar with REAL, we are a nonprofit that strives to ensure Silicon Valley twice exceptional students thrive in school by raising parent and educator awareness and understanding of solutions that are research-based to help address their needs. And this is an example of one of the ways we do that, is these talks. If you're here, you're probably familiar with 2E, but just in case, we define 2E as students who have both distinguishing strengths, high abilities or potential in one or more areas, and complex challenges at the same time, such as specific learning disabilities like dyslexia, ADHD, autism, anxiety, and others. And so the 2E students are in this green space. They have both the strengths and the challenges at the same time, and the way they combine and interact makes them more challenging to support than some other students. You can always learn more at real2e.org. We have a topics tool that you can browse all of our past events, blog posts, and resources on a variety of topics to support 2E students. We have 2 more upcoming events this season. We have our 2E Parent by Monthly Support and our executive functioning talk on November 14th. That's a really popular one, the #1 requested topic. And then we will be announcing our spring events shortly. So you can get all this on our website. You can also join our private Google group where parents ask and answer questions about their students. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and watch our previous recordings on YouTube. As I mentioned, REAL is a nonprofit, and we do rely on your donations to keep our programming free. So if you enjoy this presentation, we would appreciate you supporting us with a donation. And now to introduce our speaker for today, Adrianne Meldrum is the founder and owner of Made for Math, an all online math center focused on serving students with dyslexia, dyscalculia, and math learning disabilities. She's a certified multisensory math instructor through Marilyn Zecher, and she holds a master's degree from Bridget Graduate School of Cognitive Diversity. Welcome, Adrianne.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to get started. Okay, so let me get my screen going and feel free to drop things in the chat. Thank you for having me, Yael and Abby. I'm so excited. We've had this on the books for a long time, so it's going to be a lot of fun today. Can you just give me a thumbs up that you see everything okay? Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, so thankfully, I was sent a bunch of questions that you all had when you registered, and I tried to find common themes. So this is my attempt today. And if I didn't cover something that you were specifically looking for, feel free to put it in the chat. But also, if we don't get to it, I am happy to respond to emails and such. So my plan today is we're going to cover just a little bit of dyscalculia. It's a huge topic, and we don't have quite enough time. Same with dysgraphia. But we'll discuss slow processing, working memory, math fact fluency, and math anxiety is a big one. So true dyscalculia affects about 6% of school-age children. In a classroom of 30 students, that would look like 1 or 2. Often we see students receiving a diagnosis of dyscalculia when it might actually be their dyslexia that's impacting it, or maybe severe ADHD instead. But if they get the diagnosis, that's not necessarily a problem because that means more access to accommodations. So when a student has dyscalculia, typically what we see is the progress in mathematics is painfully slow. That's how you know you found a kiddo that has dyscalculia. They struggle to make any kind of real progress. So I'm going to go over just a few of the hallmarks that we see. Students with dyscalculia struggle with their math facts, similar to maybe a student with dyslexia. Even with practice, that recall is super poor. And we also see a total reliance on counting as one of their main problem-solving strategies, which holds them back from progressing in mathematics altogether. Place value is also mystifying to a student with dyscalculia. They haven't grasped that position means that the number is changing size and magnitude. They don't understand how that even works and causes a lot of frustration for them. They also have no sense of the answers are even correct that they're coming to. Often we see a poor sense of time. They might not even know what 15 minutes feels like, or if they have an appointment, they're not necessarily sure what time they need to get ready during the day for that appointment. They don't understand how to read the clock or grasp how a calendar works or work with money. And their mental math skills are weak and often caused by anxiety. And they have to rely on that counting strategy, which slows them down. So my general advice for you, because we're so short on time today, don't monkey around at the schools. Hire an expert. If your child has a dyscalculia diagnosis, your time is really important. And like I said, remediation takes a long time. So hire an expert. Look for a multisensory math specialist that's been trained by Marilyn Zecher, like myself, or David Berg is really popular in California of Making Math Real. There's Professor Sharma, he's East Coast, and Dr. Schroeder, she's in Texas. And I also will have a handout that I'll share with the ladies here so they can pass that out to you and get it to you. That has links to all of these. So don't stress about pulling up their names. I've got you covered there. But due to the complexity of the cognitive functions needed to be successful in mathematics, I wanted to use a model to help us visualize what's happening in the brain while we're learning. This is the information processing model, and it's going to help us think through some of the things we're going to talk about today. And none of the issues that you're probably currently dealing with in mathematics, such as dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, ADHD, autism, none of that can be addressed in isolation. It all has a lot of cognitive overlap. Everything's integrated. So today you're going to hear ideas that could help your child in a section that maybe you haven't even considered before. So let's get started with dysgraphia. So the truth is we know very little about dysgraphia. It's still being researched, but we do know it can look different in every child, from struggling to get their words from their thoughts down onto paper, but it also can look like struggling to write and form letters. And that indicates maybe a struggle with their visual, spatial, fine motor skills. And writing is a really complex process, right? It involves so many skills: fine motor, spatial perception, working memory, the orthographic coding, the language processing, conceptualization, and organization, to name a few. So our goal for a student like this would be to increase access. So we do that by creating an environment where their fine motor skills are not a hindrance. So we're going to use large box graph paper to do math homework. The graph paper you can buy in the store does not have boxes big enough. You actually would want to create your own with boxes that are at least a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, so the student can put the numbers inside of those boxes. Then we recommend rotating a wide ruled paper. Now, if you look at my camera for a second, instead of having it like this, rotate it 90 degrees, use the columns instead to help students line up their mathematics. This helps with organization and keeping place value in its correct spot. We recommend that if you're going to help a student who has these issues, 16-point font or bigger, so they can see it clearly, and plenty of room for writing, because we know that their numbers and letters can be different sizes and they need as much space as possible to show their work. And we also recommend not having more than 2 problems on a page, and shielding that second problem with another piece of paper to limit the overwhelm and the visual information that's coming in. There's also this super cool software called Equatio. It works with Google Docs. There's an app on your iPad you could get. And what's cool about that is even sloppy handwriting can be turned into text that is readable. And so that is an accommodation you could ask for a student who has dysgraphia, so that a teacher could accurately correct that work and give feedback to the student, because they can read the handwriting at this point. Okay, and then hands-on materials. If you're working with manipulatives with the student, make sure they're bigger, they're more chunky. We like to use a beaded number line with students. And so if they have dysgraphia, we use big wooden beads with these students instead of the small pony beads, because of the fine motor skills that are involved. So hands-on materials, make sure they're larger in scale. And a lot of the things that I'm going to be going over also help with this dysgraphia. So pay attention to those, because these are the same recommendations we would use with a student dysgraphia. But slower processing can impact mathematics greatly. So when we look a little bit deeper at what's happening in the brain, we're actively trying to pull this information from short and long term and use it to help us create a product like math homework. And so writing those thoughts on paper is actually one of the highest levels of executive functioning that you could be doing. And it's super difficult, including people like me. I really struggle to get my thoughts out. It may not look like it because of this presentation, but I do. It took me a lot of time to put this together. So the goal is, let's give these students more think time. So many of you might have already asked for extra time on tests, but don't be afraid to advocate for more time on assignments or shortened assignments. And then you could also ask for teachers to do an audio recording or a video recording of the lessons at school. This helps a student with slower processing speed listen later and turn the playback speed down or turn on those closed captioning to help support their processing. And it's super important when we're using the language of mathematics with these students that we speak at a slower pace with natural pauses for think time. You want to make sure that your language is clear and concise. We don't want to clutter it up with too much information, talking too quickly. Okay, and working memory. Working memory pulls that information from our short-term and long-term and can be used to hold up to 3 or 4 pieces of information at a time. You know that moment of panic when you're trying to remember a phone number, right? And you're saying it back because there's just too many digits for you to remember. That's why, because our brain can only hold 3 or 4 at a time. So with working memory, we have the inner eye. Visual information is used here. So students with strong visual memory, you're going to see them looking up in the sky while they're thinking or down at the ground while they're thinking. And that's their inner eye at work. The inner eye is used for mental math, for understanding magnitude and how big or how small a number is. And then we have that inner voice, which is what is used for using those math facts or the names for the number and trying to dictate those numbers down on paper. So for the child that may be thinking of the number but struggles to write that down, that's a struggle with their inner voice. It's weaker in this case. So what do we do about that? We want to scaffold as much as possible. This is my favorite tip. We call it active subitizing. And I will show you what it is here in just a minute. To subitize means to see suddenly. So think of dice patterns, domino patterns, tally marks. These are organized patterns to help us see quantity. And then I want you to make near point references or graphic organizers to support the working memory, to help students remember what steps are needed to solve. And we love using graphic organizers that have what we call buttons, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. Then you want to chunk information into small bite-sized pieces of information, 3 or 4 at a time, no more than that. For students doing algebra, we want to draw a long line in between solving steps to help the brain think, okay, I'm finished with this step, draw a line. Now what's next? They do that step, then they draw a line to help signify I've finished with the processing of this step. And let's go through my favorite stuff. Okay, active subitizing is when students are building the quantity with hands-on materials or they're drawing. And our general guidelines are that you always subitize anything larger than 4. Start with dot patterns, expand to tally marks, and that helps with generalizing this idea of quantities to other systems of marking a quantity. And always tie the symbolic form, the numerals of the number, to that dot pattern. So to see what I'm talking about, this is a Hungarian 10 frame. We use these all the time. We think they're a fantastic tool, and we prefer these actually over the 10 frames that are very common in schools. It's such a great way for students to see the quantity and actively subitize and build. And so we encourage turning it into a game. So if you have a Hungarian 10 frame and the child builds 7 here, you could say something like, if that says 7, make it say 9. And they're adding 2 more. If that says 9, make it say 5. This really helps students understand how quantities build and how they can contract, they can break it down into smaller pieces. So let's take it to the tally mark idea. These are base 10 blocks. So these are larger quantities. They're harder to read without counting one by one. When I look at 60 there, I want to get my pointer finger out and count them to make sure I got them all right. Again, because it's bigger than 3 or 4, so I can't see the quantity very quickly. So if we subitize that, now we can see that we're changing the quantity. We've got a group of 5 and one more, which makes 6. And then we can subitize this other quantity of 8 into 5 and 3. And so students can quickly see the quantity without having to get their finger down and count, which frees up that working memory so that they can do other steps. This applies even in algebra. Okay, this example came from a really popular curriculum called CPM Math. And I pulled this right from their instruction book. And I looked at this and I thought, this is such a mess. How do they expect students to work with this like that? So let's apply some subitizing here. So if we reorganize it into dice patterns of 5, now it's a lot easier to see what's going on. And I can quickly see, oh, here's a 0 pair. Those cancel each other out, but really they add up to 0, so I can remove those from the board. And here's another 0 pair. So it allows us to quickly identify and see these quantities. This is important for all grade levels. The subitizing idea is a game changer for a lot of students. Okay, then we talked about near point references, so graphic organizers. Now, this one is awesome because multi-digit multiplication takes a lot of procedure to get through. And so when we use this one, we actually introduce it with gross motor first, and we get our fist out and we're going to punch in the directionality to go along with the chants that you hear. So step 1, you're multiplying down in that lower right-hand corner, you're punching, and you say 1s to the 1s, and then the student writes that down. Then 1s to the 10s, and they punch and make sure they get in that cross body movement in, write the answer down. Then you see in step 2, I say shift. And so honestly, if the student is in a spot where they can, they would stand up, hop over, and now they're going to shift into the next place value and do the same thing. We're punching 10s to the 1s, write the answer down. 10s to the 10s, right? Write the answer down. Now add. And students get really good at this because we get the gross motor going and it's easier to remember. And we scaffold and slowly start moving these out, and the students don't need this anymore. But now they have a strong visual in their head of punching in the air. They have a chant that goes with it. We're tapping into a lot of multiple senses here to help them with that recall. Another example that I love, this is a GIF that we made for PEMDAS. So one of the things that's really tricky for kids is remembering that with multiplication and division, you go from left to right. And it doesn't matter if it's divide first, then multiply. What matters is left to right with reading. So here we start with the grouping symbols with the parentheses or the bars, any of those, and we move to exponents, then multiplication and division from left to right, add and subtract from left to right. And we scaffold this by introducing this GIF, then the picture, and then we encourage students to start writing it down in the same organization on their own paper so that they create their own near point reference anytime they're taking a test to help them remember the steps. And before you know it, eventually they don't even need it. They remember what order to do it in. Here's an example of buttons. So we love buttons, especially for long division. It's so hard. So we begin with this graphic organizer. And you can see that we have really simple language. The first step, divide. The question you should be asking, how many groups can I make? Don't say goes into. Goes into has no meaning in mathematics. Like, let's use real mathematical language. How many groups can I make? If I start with 5, how many groups can I make with 25? Okay. Then we multiply. Write the amount of groups at the top line. Then multiply, subtract, compare. Do I have enough to make another group? If you do, then you might need to go back and revisit the steps, right? Then we can bring down the next number and repeat the steps. What we like to do with these buttons is teach the student to use their non-dominant hand, their left hand for most students, and point to the steps as they're doing the work so that they have something else tracking down the page than their eyes. They're touching and pointing to these dots. And then use a large box graph paper to help them keep that all lined up. So those are some of those tips that I love to share here. So let's talk about word problems. So chunking is a great example of how we can adjust word problems. Too many of us are teaching students to look for the keywords in problems and associate it with an operation. The problem with that is, just like in English, there's too many exceptions to the rule. It just doesn't work. So instead, let's follow these guidelines. So allow students to create a visual representation of what's happening. But we don't want the manipulatives to become an inefficient calculator. So teach students to do simple pictures. They don't have to be detailed, circles, squares, tally marks, whatever you want to do. Help the student move from drawing simple pictures ultimately to writing the numbers. Gotta click. And then my other tip is reveal one sentence at a time. This allows students to visualize and draw and write what's happening in that first sentence. Students need time to monitor and reflect on their problem-solving process. So at school, students are taught to read the entire problem, circle those keywords and the numbers, and then try to figure out the operation. There is very strong evidence that that's not the way we want to do that. Instead, we want students to stop at the period, draw, reflect, reason, and think about the context. So there's some really interesting work from Eileen Marzola, and we loved what she had to say about helping students with comprehension. So she says that we need to think before. So when you read that first sentence, you're going to pause and ask them if they know anything about this topic. And then you're going to think along. As you continue to reveal one sentence at a time, you're asking questions like, what pictures could you draw? What numbers could you write? What operation do you think could work? Right? And then we want to ask, what do you think the question might be before they even get to that point? Sometimes they might actually be accurate. Other times they might not. Then we want to think after. We want to summarize. This is huge. This is really important. A lot of schools are emphasizing this in standardized testing. Teach the student how to restate the answer using the words from the problem to write a full sentence. You're summarizing what just happened. What's the solution? These help students learn to process and get all of that juice coming out of all the things that they know. Okay, let's move on to math fact fluency. This is a big one. Many of you are concerned about this, and you should be. You're in good company, because middle school teachers report that more than half of their students don't know their math facts. And of that 50%, not all of them have a learning disability. So what's going on? Well, let's talk about what's happening in the brain here. So different parts of the brain are used for problem solving when compared to retrieval of math facts. Brain imaging studies suggest that math calculations rely on interaction between parts of the brain that process the quantity and the visual information and the verbal representation of the numbers. However, rote math calculations are largely using just that verbal system, possibly because math facts are typically taught through rote verbal memorization. Think flashcards, Mad Minute. That's from Blakemore and Frith in 2005. So since math fact retrieval is utilizing the verbal system, we can see why these students are also likely to struggle with their math facts. So recalling math facts is a matter of word retrieval, which is an area of weakness for students with dyslexia. However, it should be noted that these students may not have as much difficulty with math reasoning due to the many parts of the brain involved in math problem solving compared to the math fact recall alone. So what I'm trying to say is, in other words, just because you're bad at math facts does not mean you're bad at math. My son is 2E. When he was younger, everyone thought in his class, his teachers, his peers, that he was just not so good at math. However, when we went and had his testing done, it revealed he was gifted in mathematics, and the only area he struggled in was quick, rapid recall. And so we were able to switch him into gifted education math, just in that one area, and he excelled. He did really well because we were actually challenging what he could do. He's doing awesome. So, is it dyslexia? Is it dyscalculia? Is it possibly both? In dyslexia, we see issues with phonological processing, word retrieval, and working memory, which impacts those math facts. In dyscalculia, we see issues with working memory, numerical semantics, the how math actually works, and spatial representation of numbers. But what about those students that have both? You'll see that they have both sets of those traits, and they have a stronger deficit in semantics and that mental representation of numbers. And that impacts about 6 and 20% of the student population, which still doesn't add up to 50% of students struggling. So what's going on? Why do we see such a high percentage of students struggling with that? Unfortunately, math instruction often fails to take into account the way that that brain is processing and storing information. So drilling through flashcards and completing time minute utilizes an insufficient amount of sensory information when you're introducing math facts. So these rote learning methods provide limited linkages in the brain. So the brain is quick to prune it, to get rid of it, because it's really not that interesting. They haven't deemed it as a helpful bit of information. They're also taught in isolation and not in conjunction with other math topics. In some cases, though, rote drilling may be appropriate when students are actively engaged and moving a set of known facts. They know the math facts from short term to long term. However, it isn't an appropriate method for initial fact learning. But I want to be super clear. Flashcards and time tests are not the enemy, but really only should be used for using those known facts to their short and long-term memory. Okay, so what do we do? Tell me. What should we do if it's not through flashcards? So we have some guiding principles. Every student should be introduced to math facts using these. We want to narrow the facts. We restrict them. If you're teaching a student to add within 10, for example, don't teach all of the add-ins of 10 all at once. Remember chunking 3 or 4. Chunk it down into smaller. So instead, we're going to be going maybe from 4 and down, all the add-ins within 4. And then we can expand a little bit more from there. We want to do that subitizing. Let's apply that subitizing and actively get students to build these quantities to help them make sense of it so that their brain will hang on to that information. We want to provide them with that hands-on instruction. Our initial instruction should include hands-on, touching, and saying the facts out loud. So we would want to say something like 4 plus 6 equals 10. They're going to touch the manipulatives and say it at the same time. And provide those near point references. That does not necessarily mean a piece of paper. It can be a stick of Unifix cubes with those add-ins of 10. Or if you're teaching the math facts, multiplication facts of 5, you've got alternating colors of groups of 5. That can be their near point reference. Okay, so let me get all my senses up here. When we tap into more senses, we strengthen those connections in the brain. And now instead of just seeing a fact written in numbers and saying it, a student's going to be touching it, seeing it, and saying the fact, which helps it commit more likely to long-term memory. Okay, now our lessons when we teach math facts We're following the framework of Dr. Joyce Steeves, and this format is similar to what you would probably see in an Orton Gillingham reading lesson, for those of you that might be familiar with that. So we always begin with a warm-up and counting. These are things the student already knows how to do. We want to set them up for success. We're going to play a practice game, practice those known facts that they do know. Then we're going to introduce some new vocabulary using etymology and word study. We don't shy away from using actual mathematical terminology with students. We study those words, we break down the parts and roots so the student understands where it's coming from, and then we tie it to a visual, some sort of gross motor to help them recall that information in the future. Then we introduce the new concept, and we're using the CRA framework. C is for concrete, we're doing hands-on. R is for representational. Some of you might have heard of pictorial, those are pictures. And then abstract is just the numbers. But you don't do it step by step. You don't teach these in isolation. We do them side by side so the student can start generalizing these ideas across that. It's not a sequence, it's a framework. And then we play a game and we practice this new concept. All right, so the next thing I just wanted to share, like that's a lot, but we've written it all down for you if you want to teach a student how to add and subtract within 10. We wrote a book on it this year because it's so important, and there are so many kids that are struggling with this, like I said, that are just regular kids. They don't have any extra learning disability or anything hindering them. So this is appropriate for all students. I'm going to drop a link to it if you want to go check it out, but it's all written out for you just like an OG reading lesson would be. And you're going to know how to add and subtract within 10 by the time you get to the end of that book. It's tons of fun. We're working on volume 2 with multiplication and division, and we hope to release it in 2024. But I say hopefully. I was telling Yale the other day, it all depends on time and money, baby. Time and money. I wish I had mountains of it because we would go really fast if we could. Okay, here's the big one, math anxiety. I saw so many comments about math anxiety. My heart breaks for you. It's something I know you're dealing with, and I deal with it in my home too. So I think let's start with a little bit of a funny. This is from Adrianne Hedger. I don't know if you follow Adrianne Hedger on Instagram, but you should because she's hilarious. So there's some common ways that I think kids try to get out of doing their math homework, but really they're anxiety based. But you know, sometimes they get really chatty and they just want to tell you all about their day instead of doing that math. Or suddenly they want to do that chore for you that you wanted them to do on Saturday, but now it's really important today. Or they encounter a user error. They burn a hole through their paper with their eraser. Or they're just so hungry, so thirsty, right? Or suddenly they care about their personal hygiene. That's my son. Like suddenly it's like, I got to take a shower. I smell. I got to get out of here. I got to do this. Or my favorite, they slowly start slipping down underneath the table, trying to get away from you and that homework. Math anxiety is a beast, and it can stem from several of the places that we're talking about here. So let's look at how this happens. So to begin with, we need to engage the brain with our intention. So here we can see all the things that we could use to be engaged, right? We have to have some sort of auditory maybe, or some sort of visual stimulus, and it's a blend of all of these things. And if we happen to get adequate attention and we're ready to start learning, the information starts to be scanned by the amygdala, which is that tiny almond-shaped piece in the brain, and it's looking for a threat. And this is where that fight, flight, fawn, or freeze comes in. The amygdala is so helpful, but it can't necessarily tell the difference between math homework and a tiger coming to get you. So if the amygdala decides math is a threat, or that the teacher is mad at them, or that you're mad, then all this working memory is prohibited. It's stopped in its path, and students are now overstimulated either from the distractions in their environment or possibly understimulated, and they're just super bored. And before you know it, math anxiety is ruling your day. Okay, So what do we do about an overstimulated child? So this is a child that's crying, that's upset, they're burning holes in their paper, they're rubbing their eyes, there's bursts of anger. They might even be going as far as throwing up because they're so overwhelmed. We have students like this that attend at Made for Math, and getting that anxiety under control is so important. So our goal is to teach them self-regulation. So here's my caveat. If they're having panic attacks, my son did this, panic attacks. He also had struggles with perfectionism and generalized anxiety disorder. So even though he's gifted at mathematics, he would have panic attacks about math, even though he can do it. And so for him, I would model breathing. And when he was shorter, this doesn't work so good, but when he was shorter, he would put his forehead on my chest and we would breathe together to get through the panic attack. And if that wasn't working, then I would have him go get in the shower. And when you let water run down over the top of your head, it helps reset your system, helps you to let go of that anxiety really quickly. So that you got to just deal with the panic attack if it's happening. Otherwise, homework, if you keep trying to bust through that homework, it's just not going to work. It's just going to get worse. Then kind of evaluate the situation. Are their basic needs met? Do they need a snack? Do they need a drink of water? Did they get, some physical exertion out after school? And remove some movement in the peripherals. My son needed this. If the TV was on, or he could hear a brother playing a game in the other room, or siblings, or even the dog walking in and out, we tried to get rid of any movement to help get that attention going so that he could grab it and maintain it. Sometimes you need to take a walk. If he's crying and the homework's just not really going anywhere, take a break. Take a walk, go jump on the trampoline, get some physical exertion out. But my caveat is set a boundary about it. It doesn't mean they get out of it just because they cried. It just means like, we're going to take a walk for 10 minutes, then we're going to try again. Then this is huge. This is huge, especially for those of you with middle schooler kids. When kids are in middle school, their ability to accurately read facial expressions is completely wrong because their prefrontal lobes are developing. And so they might look at you and you might be looking at their homework going, wow, I haven't worked with common denominators and I don't know how long. And you might kind of crumple your eyebrow because you're thinking, you're trying to access your long-term memory. And your child might look at you and say, she's mad at me. I messed up. And they're starting to spiral and the anxiety gets out of control. So a quick fix for that is don't sit across from each other at the table. Sit shoulder to shoulder so that they can't necessarily see your face and maybe the shock that you're feeling because you can't remember how to do it. But this way, they don't have that opportunity to receive that additional input and maybe interpret it the wrong way. So that's really, really helpful. And then advocate for shorter homework assignments, especially in the 2E population. Not all of these kids need 50 problems of homework to make sure they've got it. It's so unnecessary. So advocate for that. Shorter homework all the way is the win. Okay, what do you do about those kids that are totally understimulated? They think math is so boring, that they've got other things they could be doing. Maybe math comes a little bit easier to them, but they're just really not interested. So we want to increase engagement. And this list, I kind of organized it from the easier things to do to a little more difficult. So we could have them just play with a fidget spinner or doodle while they're working on their math problems. We could have them listen to music. And actually, what I hear from ADHD students, especially, just play the same song on repeat. They often like gamer type music. So I'll go into Spotify, we'll find a gamer list of music, and that helps them maintain that focus. And if you want a link to that, let me know in the chat. I have a list of playlists. It's study playlist on my website, but I don't think I put it in the PDF. And then have them do something they really enjoy for 10 minutes, get that energy out. And then again, set the boundary for 10 minutes, and then we got to get back to it. This one's really interesting. So if you can get a recording of the lesson at school, either audio or video, have them listen to it before they do their homework at 1.5 to 2 times the speed, because they most likely have a really good language receptor. They can hear, take it in really fast. My husband can listen to podcasts at 2-3 times the speed and know what they're saying. I can't. That gives me anxiety, but he can do it. But his expressive language is really slow. And so obviously my husband's 2E, whether he wants to embrace the label or not, but that is a hack for him. And we've recommended that for students at Made for Math, and it works really well. We give them access to their lesson that they had with their math specialist, and then they listen to it at 1.5, 2 times the speed to help them. And then also you can just do something as simple as letting them stand while they do their homework and give them hands-on materials to increase that engagement. But what about those of you that might be in the classroom? So for kids in the classroom, this is difficult, but normalize accommodations. Just make it normal. Everyone in your classroom would benefit from these things. So copies of notes for all students. Such a great tool. I know I appreciate that as a parent when I can get the notes from what the teacher talked about. Take the time to do an audio or video recording of the lessons at school. Use ChatGPT to make your notes for you. It's so cool. We could do a whole nother class about that. I'm a nerd when it comes to ChatGPT. I love it. It's so awesome. I put that on there. Okay, noise canceling headphones. See if you can get someone to donate a set of them to the classroom. Make them available for everyone. It doesn't matter if you have an accommodation or not, just make them available. And then my other favorite hack, a lot of students get anxiety when people around them are finishing a test faster. So on the very back page of your math test, draw a doodle of a squiggle, a box or something, and tell students that they can't get out of their seat until the end of the period. So they flip it over and they draw doodles. That way it looks like to other students, everyone's still working on their math test. And then allow students to take unlimited retakes. In the adult world, we get a redo often, but kids don't get this in school very often. So advocate that they can have unlimited retakes, because kids who want to work hard will work hard. And those that take the test over and over, teachers, if they're still failing, then you know you've got a bigger problem. There's something else at play. And then lastly, listen and validate those students' feelings. And then we reduce the length of homework. No, like I said earlier, no one needs 50 problems of math homework. And so with that, I wanted to wrap up because we've got 15 minutes, right? And I will answer questions. I'll turn off my screen share here. Okay, I just unleashed a ton on you. I'm so sorry, but I am open book. Ask me anything you'd like.
That was amazing. I mean, I heard so many things here that I had not heard before.
Awesome.
Yes.
Good.
Abby, do you want to do first question?
Sure. Yeah, we've been keeping track of all of the questions, and I'm gonna just go through a list and ask you. But yeah, thank you so much. This was really exciting. I'm already like, I can't wait to get the recording. I'm gonna send it to all these people. So this is great. Okay, so my first question that I'm going to ask from someone in the chat who was saying they have a son who's 14 who's never had a math program that understands how he learns, and he doesn't want to be different in his class. So you kind of addressed this right at the end, but I think she was asking, how can she ask the teacher to use these tips? And maybe the solution is do it to the whole class, but is there also other alternatives, like give him a one-on-one separate space, so as not to cause him more anxiety? And how do you think about that? What's your best practice for talking to teachers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you get the recording of this, share it with the teacher, but emphasize like biggest bang for your buck is right at the end. That's what I would tell them, like listen to the stuff at the end. But they can't, I would recommend, your child might not like this at first, but advocating to see if your child can take a test out in the hallway. That would be preferable because there's less going on usually in the hallway. If that's not possible, maybe sitting towards the back of the classroom with their back. So again, it's about that peripheral view, removing the distraction around them to keep that anxiety down as much as possible. But I feel like some of the tips I shared are easy enough that a lot of teachers would be willing to do that. you know, and then even offering, if the teacher doesn't record their lessons, offer to help them figure out how to do that. Like offer to show them how to set that up if they don't know how, and show them how to use ChatGPT, because it's amazing, you guys. Like I took your questions you submitted, gave it to ChatGPT, and I said, tell me what are the general themes, because it was a lot. And I wanted to make sure I covered it all and that my bias didn't affect what you put in the chat, because what I think is important might be different from what you think is important. So anyways, I'm getting sidetracked, but any way that you can show the teacher you're willing to help, they're going to appreciate that. I don't think they're going to be threatened by that. And so just make sure you're always talking about how we're a team together. I'm willing to help. You know, here's some ideas that you could do here in the classroom.
Thank you. Okay, and then the next question is around like a child who's having full refusal of math work. So again, I think you addressed a bit about what to do with anxiety issues, but when you've got maybe a student who's got so many years of trauma around math, they're just completely refusing to work on it at all, what are your best first step tips?
Yes. Okay. This is common. So play games as much as possible. If you go to, I don't have the exact link, but let me drop one that I think so you at least can get close. In our shop, we have a deck of cards that feature that subitizing I was talking about. If you can get your child to start playing games with you with those, it's going to lower that anxiety. They might tell you no at first, but make it as simple as possible. It could just be a Go Fish game just to get the ball started. But games are key, and a lot of what we do at Made for Math is game-based. Students are used to seeing that. Even the first assessment they experience with us is playing games, and we're just making notes about what's happening, what kinds of errors are occurring, and where do we need to start. So games are a really great sneaky way to get in there with your child. The other thing I would recommend is, they might hate this idea too, but journaling about that trauma. So I can find this link for you in a second, but academic wounding is a very real thing. And so one way that we can address that is through a free write where we're giving them the prompt. So the prompt could be something like, tell me the moment you knew you were bad at math. You will be shocked. Students know the exact moment they knew they were bad at this, and help them write about it. And you write too. I'm sure you had moments, right, where you were like, gosh, this math is out to get me. Stats, that was me. Stats is like a whole nother math language that I did not enjoy. Maybe it was my graduate school experience, but I didn't enjoy it. And so I journaled about it because I was having a hard time getting over that. And my anxiety was really high. So addressing it through some open writes can help, and help normalize that a lot of people feel frustration and struggle with mathematics. They're not alone in that. So games and free write journaling is huge.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna ask one more, and then I'm gonna hand it off to Yael to read some of her the questions she's gonna pick from the list. Okay, so I have another question, which is, somebody said, is it indeed possible for a child with dyslexia and or dyscalculia to memorize multiplication charts? So yes, it's more challenging because of that rapid automatic naming challenges, but is it simply something they should be accommodated out of, or is it possible?
It's possible. It takes forever. I will be honest with you, it takes a really long time. We've got a kiddo that has both, that's been here with us at Made for Math since 2018. But it's something that we're constantly revisiting. So how do you do this? This is, again, another really good tip for teachers. We don't hold a student back from learning age-appropriate math. So if they don't have those math facts learned, that doesn't matter. So what we do is we narrow and restrict the math facts again. So let's say fractions, for example, and this student is still learning how to add, I don't know, above 6 or something like that. So let's say the focus facts or the math facts of 6 in addition. So if we're doing fractions, all of the fractions have sums of 6, different variations of 6. And so that way the student is learning age-appropriate content, but getting that recurring practice of math facts. That is a game changer for a lot of students. And as they pass off math facts in the past, you want to revisit them, mix it in. But that is a huge, huge game changer for a lot of students. It lowers that working memory, the lag, because they're working with numbers that they're familiar with, and then they make enough space to learn that new content. So that's a huge game changer. It's possible. So my advice would be, don't give up on it, just restrict the math facts.
Such great ideas. We have so many questions, Adrienne. If a kid is already struggling with reading and writing, do you think it makes sense to get them started with math?
Typically what we recommend is, if reading is an issue, start with that first. And it also depends on the age of the child. Did they happen to mention the age? No. Okay. So if they're younger, let's say they're still in elementary, focus on that reading and the writing. You can bring your kiddos to us, for example, like when they're approaching 6th grade, and that would be a great time to start working on those skills. Often what we see, sometimes parents get all gung-ho and they're like, oh, we're going to get the reading therapy, the math therapy, the OT, the this, the that. The kids are overscheduled and the progress starts to slow down greatly. So focus on things that are going to make the biggest bang for your buck. So the reading is going to impact math. Absolutely. So focus on that first. And I promise, I know your mama heart might be going, yeah, but what about, now they're going to stagnate. You're not hurting your child. I promise you, you're not hurting your child. We are going to be able to get them caught up. It can happen, but focusing that reading first is huge.
Abby, do you want to do the next one, or you want me to?
Sure. Okay, let's see. What do we have here? Okay, here's an interesting one. How do we encourage kids to show their math on a math worksheet? Or possibly, how do we encourage teachers not to require that? But the question was, my son can do his math work, but refuses to show his worksheet or do any step-by-step work on paper. What do we do?
What age is this student?
Doesn't
Do we
say.
know? Okay, so when you're younger, yeah, it doesn't seem like that big of a problem. But as you progress in mathematics, it's going to get to the point where you can't see what the answer is anymore. You can't noodle your way out of it. So you have to give them a compelling reason why. So for me, one of my, I guess, favorite examples is I had a student who was a 9th grader, 2E, wanted to be a pilot. And so I have a bunch of pilots in my family. So I called them and I said, okay, he doesn't want to show his work. What compelling reason can I give him? And they said, oh, in flight, like his entire career, every time you're getting ready to leave, you have to show your co-pilot the math step by step to show them. And this isn't hard math. This is basic math, but you have to show them step by step so that they can verify and check. Okay. And my brother-in-law let me know recently that he just had to put someone on leave because he couldn't do that. He could not show how he got the number for the load. And so my brother-in-law is a trainer. He wrote it all out and said, I'm sorry, but this is too many times. You can't continue to be a pilot anymore. I'm going to report you to the training facility. And they pulled him off the flight because he can't talk about the loads. So you got to give them compelling reasons. And I know that's far in the future, but compelling reasons why we got to show our work. And we got to talk more about how mathematics is a form of communication. And so it helps us to be better at communicating our thinking with other people. We're communicating in another language of mathematics. So give them a compelling reason why. So think about, what do they want to do in the future? How does that tie to mathematics? Nurses have to show each other how they come up with calculations. Like, these things happen. Firemen have to do rapid calculations with ratios to make sure they don't lift one of their teammates up in the air with water, right? So these are compelling reasons. They're not exciting maybe right now in the moment, but they're important for the long term.
I really love that. Yes, tying it into their passions. One person says, my 14-year-old son makes careless mistakes with math due to his working memory and ADHD and desire to be done. His mental math is exceptionally strong. Any suggestions?
Yeah. So again, like tapping into, what's the long-term goal with the mathematics is really important. And then the careless mistakes, be careful calling them that to your child too. Like it can start to cause like a shame spiral about that, because it's not necessarily he's being careless, it's that his brain is just struggling to keep up with the speed at which he's working. So one way you could get around this, because my guess is his processing speed's faster, but there's a disconnect to how quickly he can write it down. So get that Equatio app, and you can do voice to text. He can talk it out, or he can write it quickly and it will type it out for him. But that being able to talk out your work would actually help him speed through the homework, right? But it will help him with that disconnect of the rapid processing that he's experiencing, and that delay down to the paper is really frustrating. So be open to using some adaptive devices like that.
All right, here's the next one. One parent asked, our son has dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and is a nonverbal learner. Do the math strategies that you presented here would they serve a learner like their son, or are there additional resources they should research or learn more about?
Oh, absolutely. What we do has a lot of strong evidence. So yes. What we do would totally help that child. Mm-hmm.
And then someone else asks, is the psychologist who talks about stealth dyslexia when the problem is math, reading is way ahead, ignoring dyscalculia? Are they separate assessments or the same?
They're typically separate assessments. You're going to see the WISC used, sometimes the key math, the Pfeiffer assessment of mathematics. So the psychologist should be using something like that to look directly at the math. So if you do Pfeiffer assessment of mathematics, he has subtypes. And what's helpful about that is a student with dyslexia is going to struggle more in the subtype around verbal skills needed for math. So that's where you're going to see low scores, but they might be off the charts in other areas with those subtypes, which really helps you target the intervention. I feel like it does a better job than like the WISC as far as giving information for doing something about it. Like, what can I do to help the student? So yes, it's different testing than what you would do for reading.
All right, we're just about at one. I'm going to ask you one final question, and sorry to everyone who's, hopefully we got to your question, but there were so many. We tried to do our best, but my final question would be, one of the parents asked, is there any class that a parent could take to help acquire skills to serve learners like this?
Yes. Okay.
In their own class.
In the PDF that I'm going to give to Yael and Abby to send out, there are 2 links you should pay attention to. One is Marilyn Zecher. She teaches classes. You can either do an independent study where you're watching her videos and trying it with your student, or if you want to start on the path of becoming like a certified instructor like me, which I will warn you is very long. It took me 5 years to get there. So you could go down that path, and you're interacting with Marilyn and receiving feedback and those kinds of things. So there's that link. Then there's also Professor Sharma. Professor Sharma is on the East Coast. He does free classes every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Every year he starts over. So he starts at like basic number and goes all the way up into algebra 2, teaching it the way that we're talking about. So really, really good. So make sure to go check those out in that printout that I'm going to share with you guys.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. This was amazing. I want to be respectful of your time. We so appreciate you sharing your time and expertise. People nonstop in the chat were very excited about everything you were sharing and share the recording with everyone. If we didn't get to people's questions, are you okay with them emailing you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'll post your email in the chat, and we look forward to sending out all of your information that you have for everybody, along with the recording to everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming, everyone. I always love nerding out about this stuff.
This was
Thank
great.
you, everyone, for coming.
See you later.
And the recording.
Yeah, the music list. I will get that. I saw that in the chat. I will get that. Music list.